Welcome to Calvin Crest. Welcome to Calvin Crest. Welcome to Calvin Crest. Hi, welcome to the Hamm stump is what we like to call it here in Calvin Crest. I don't know if this tree has any other name, but that's the name that it goes by here. This tree is actually quite large. It's a giant sequoia, and you can see the stump that's remaining right behind me. The diameter of it's probably about 4 meters in diameter. The thing is quite huge, at least for a tree, right? And it's part of the Nelder Grove, which was one of the groves of giant sequoias that was discovered by John Muir. We're just outside of Yosemite National Park here. So if we look off, just kind of back that way just a little bit is Yosemite National Park. And this is part, like I said, the Nelder Grove. This is a pretty special place. These trees don't grow anywhere. And when they were harvesting them, this tree was harvested probably about 100 years ago. When they harvested these trees, you can see they cut them up quite high, so they didn't end up cutting off a lot of that root mass area that wasn't useful for them. And then this tree only is about 20 meters long, the piece that I'm standing on right now. It goes on a little bit past the camera, but then it's cut off from that point. And I believe that when they felled this tree, part of the wood had shattered, and so the piece that I'm standing on shattered, and then they were able to use the rest of it. Imagine this. One of these trees has enough lumber in it for approximately 100 homes. 100 homes, right? That is pretty remarkable. And that was what made them so valuable. The wood is very soft and really not that useful, but just the sheer volume of wood that they were able to get. And so that was one of the lessons that I worked on for the kids here up at Calvin Crest, trying to revise the lesson from just a actual factual show you the tree and here it is to the kids actually getting to work with the cones from the tree and really look at that whole life cycle of the giant sequoia. Hi, I think this is a nice peaceful spot that I can introduce you to Calvin Crest just a little bit. Calvin Crest is a camp, mostly a Christian camp during the summer months, but during the winter months they host an outdoor school. And so they host hundreds of kids, from anywhere between 60 to 120 kids each week, and they're booked up almost every week throughout the year. We're looking around at this beautiful setting. The kids that get to go to this camp don't live in this kind of setting. Most of them live in the valley of California, that San Joaquin Valley. It's dry, it's dusty, and majority of the kids do not travel more than 5 miles away from their house. It's just the reality of things in the valley. And so they get the opportunity to come up here, adjust some of the nature deficit disorder, and experience this wonderful place for about a week. They're learning about all kinds of things. But the original curriculum for this outdoor program was written in 1970s, early 80s, and it was kind of written a little bit over time, but it really reflected kind of the student of the time and really reflected the standards of the time. And so a lot of the hikes are led by a naturalist or led by the teacher. And those hikes are kind of actual factual, as I like to call them. You just kind of walk up to a tree, like this is the tree. This is a sequoia, this is a pine tree, this is a whatever. And that's kind of the gist of the curriculum, and I wanted to change that. And so I ended up becoming part of an ad hoc committee that the camp was putting together. And then out of that grew my project, because I was working on the ad hoc committee and trying to think about what I was going to do for my capstone, and really didn't know what the capstone project was really about at that time. So I talked with Ted Neal and kind of suggested maybe I could work with Calvin Crest, and he said, this is your project. And so I've been running with it and been having a really good time working on it. It's been hard, it's been difficult. I think that it would have been way easier to find a scientific company in Bakersfield and spend my 90 hours and write my lessons. But in terms of worthwhileness, value that's going to be coming out of this project, I think this one's probably far more valuable for someone rather than me just hanging out with a scientific company for a week. So a lot of the things that the kids are learning here, I've introduced you to the giant sequoia trees. And there's some survival courses, there's some nature walks, and a lot of them, like I said, were all just here are the facts about this. And my goal was to integrate STEM into all of these different hikes and these different lessons. And so that was been my focus. I wasn't able to do all the hikes and not all the lessons, but I am part of an ad hoc committee, and so hopefully the template that I've built for a few lessons we'll be able to duplicate for the rest of the lessons and kind of build this out. We have made some outside contact, and that, obviously a huge part of STEM is building in the outside community. And I'll take you over to the Miwok village here in just a moment, where we've actually made some outside contact, and I'll show you what that has been fruitful. It wasn't my part, but it was a project that was done a little bit earlier, and kind of continues on through my lessons back in my classroom. So I'm going to show you that Miwok village now, and so you get a chance to look at that, and then we could talk about the rest of the project. Hi, welcome to the Miwok village, just up around the corner. So this was a really special place for me in deciding kind of what to do. But Calvin Crest has a Miwok village. This is one of the houses here. There's still some acorn flour left over from the school year. This is summertime now as I'm kind of making these videos. There, that's better. This was kind of a special spot. This is an important place. I was on one of the nature hikes. I got to spend a few days up here, not quite a full week, attending the outdoor school. So that was how I spent a lot of my hours, following the kids around, helping with some of the lessons, talking with the teachers, talking with the naturalists that were working up here. And we got to this is the Miwok hike, and you hike through a lot of cool things. There's a place where you get to identify tracks, which was really fun for the kids, very active. They were really interested in that. And then you walk through kind of a deer chute, a place where the Miwok Indians would trap the deer, and then they kind of herd them into a spot, and then kind of close it up with the brush real tight, and that's how they would catch a lot of their deer into those little chutes that they would build. And then the kids kind of come up here, and they get to grind acorns. And so pretty fun, and the kids really enjoyed it. And the naturalist talking about how there's tannic acid in there, and which, I knew that, everybody knows that, right? But it really got me thinking, this was a great lesson, right? This was a great chemistry lesson. And so this was the site that sort of tied what was going on at Calvin Crest to what I could take back to my chemistry classroom. And so I started to think about like tannic acid and natural things like that, and ways that people were able to kind of get rid of issues like that, solve problems in a natural way, and kind of an engineering process. And so what the Native Americans would do is they would get a basket and place the acorns in the basket, and then they would put the basket in the creek for approximately a week, and that would wash all the tannic acid away from the acorns, and then they would be able to bring them out, break them open, and then they would use these grinding stones here like that I'm sitting on now, and that's what they would use to grind the acorn into like a flour or a mash. And then some of the acorns, they would just let them dry at that point in time, and they have these drying racks that they built, and had all kinds of ingenious ways of doing this. And so it's really started me thinking down this whole process of and really thinking about my master's, the whole degree in general, and even some of the books that I read, and one was just voluntary that I read along the way, that was for white folks that teach in the hood. I read it as part of my multicultural class for K-12, and it's just really fascinating me. But he talked about the neo-indigenous, and really started me thinking about the indigenous people as well. and how they had so much to offer. And he was talking about how we need to look at the kids in our classroom as neo-indigenous, and how their culture has, it's not its shortcomings, but we look at what it has to offer in the classroom and the beauty of that. And it really made me think about, this integrated STEM model of bringing people in, bringing outside problems in, and this seemed to work really well. I was just thinking a lot about how, the Native American people weren't starving. They had plenty of food to eat. They weren't destitute. They weren't in this savagery sort of way. They were making their living, and they were really thriving. And so I started thinking about all of that and how their lifestyle wasn't necessarily one of complete sacrifice, but of thriving, and what richness that could bring. And so I started thinking about the engineering practices that they might employ, and how we could look at that in my classroom. And so this is kind of the village that started all of those thoughts. And then I built my entire lesson kind of based on that. And then I'll be able to show you more when I get back to the computer, kind of the details behind that lesson. But this is the spot, and then I wanted to show that. Welcome back to the office. Before I jump into the lessons from my classroom, I'd like to take this opportunity to show you an example lesson that was created for the Calvin Crest Outdoor Education Program. All the lessons are set up in a similar format, and they begin with a guiding question. The intention of this lesson is that the kids will be able to answer the guiding question by the end of the hike. In addition to the guiding question, each lesson includes a gearing up section. This is typically some reading or another activity to help the kids get ready for the active part of the lesson. Additionally, this section always includes a short lesson or video the teacher can use back in the classroom to prepare the kids for their experience. Once the students have finished the gearing up section, they will move to the gathering evidence phase of the lesson. During this time, they are always collecting some sort of qualitative or quantitative data. Once this stage is complete, the kids are ready to start organizing their thoughts. In the active learning segment, the students are typically using data they collected to either create a model or prepare an argument based on the guiding question. The final section is the follow-up activity called Taking It Home. In my experience with my own students, their time at outdoor education camp is the single most significant scientific learning during their entire elementary school career. The Taking It Home segment is designed to re-engage the brain and help the students create deeper connections to the concepts they learned at Calvin Crest. The lessons you see on the screen is just one example of the 9 other lessons I worked on during my 90-plus hours. Now on to the lessons I created for my classroom. As I stated before, these lessons are all centered around Native American life. I was fascinated by the Miwok village, and so were the kids at Calvin Crest. I'm hoping that my chemistry students will also find the unit engaging. The overall guiding question for this unit is, can Native American agricultural practices solve some of our modern issues with agricultural sustainability? This question is much more associated with integrated STEM than pure chemistry, but it is particularly pertinent to the Kern County and the overall San Joaquin Valley area, since agriculture is our biggest economic driver. The unit is divided into 10 lessons. Some are longer and some are shorter. Throughout the lessons, all 8 of the science and engineering practices are used, as well as 3 of the physical science performance expectations. However, the chemistry in this unit is mostly focused on HPS 1-6, which is the changes in chemical system standard. The unit begins with a pretest and a short article that addresses one of the big misconceptions that Native Americans didn't have a robust society. After the initial reading and discussion, I found a gross article about using urine to fertilize your garden. This will introduce the fertilizer needs of plants and will reinforce the other readings later, where the authors discuss ways that Native Americans would fertilize oak trees. Following the reading, the students will go into discovery mode and determine the amount of tannic acid in acorns, and will use a field soil test to determine the difference in nitrogen levels of the soil that has vegetation burned versus no burned vegetation. Fire suppression and uncontrolled wildfire is a huge issue in California. Years of fire suppression has left us with a ridiculous amount of dry fuel. Students are introduced to the fact that Native Americans used controlled burns and kept much of California brush-free. After the lab experience, I have set up 2 experts to talk with my students. One is a personal friend who is a regenerative agricultural consultant, and the other is a representative of the Tohono Indian tribe, which is one of the largest local tribes. Students will further gather information by reading an article called The Indigenous Origins of Regenerative Agriculture, which appears to be a summary of a book called 1491, which is about the state of Americas prior to Columbus. The final aspects of this unit include 2 writing tasks. First is a CER-based assessment for me, and the second is a letter to our local congressman about sustainable practices in agriculture. Throughout this whole unit, I really tried to incorporate the idea of integrated STEM, including a strong emphasis in addressing multicultural issues, and where possible, I made the lessons using as many UDL strategies as I could incorporate. Additionally, the lessons incorporate a wide variety of technology from web-based applications to digital data collection devices. One of the reasons I decided to pursue my master's in STEM education is that I have seen a huge lack of disinterest in my chemistry class. Coming from a consulting scientist background, I don't blame the kids. All of the meaningful issues that scientists actually work on are completely removed from the course in the name of getting through the material. I'm excited to try this unit with my students and see what be prepared for college, since a meaningful experience will stick with them much more than multiple lectures about things they will only commit to short-term memory. Thank you for getting this far in the video, and if you want to see more of Calvin Crest and more background on my project, keep watching. It's a little bit dark in here, but this is the inside of the community lodge. We're able to go into this room, and I wanted to bring you in here to kind of show you some of the cool things that they have. Really difficult to see and kind of film and photograph inside here. Wish I had a really wide angle, but the cool thing about this place is that it was designed by a Native American person. So as far as STEM being bringing in outside individuals to kind of bring in that outside knowledge and that expertise. This is a really great example of that, and I'm going to talk about it inside the unit for Calvin Crest that I put together. It's a huge point. They brought in a Miwok elder, and he helped them design this entire village. They had a village before that was in a different part of the camp, but there was a fire in 2017, and it came right up against the edge of a lot of the camp and actually burned the original Miwok village. And so they brought in the elder and recreated better, even better. And if I can put this picture up right now, this picture here, I'm not allowed, I guess I probably could be allowed in this building, but I won't go in there out of respect. This is the ceremonial, kind of the sweat lodge, if we think about it that way. And no one goes in it because women are not allowed in there, and only men in certain circumstances. And so Calvin Crest respects that, and they built it, but no one has been inside since. And so the kids get to see it, they get to talk about the ceremony that was behind it. But then all of the kids get to go into this big room here and spend a little time. It's kind of dark, but this is where they would, hold any kind of village ceremony and get-togethers and that kind of thing. And so, yeah, I just wanted to bring you here to show you this. But I think this is a great example of what STEM can be. And so as I work through the lessons and think about the lessons for my classroom, thinking about how Native American lifestyle is going to be kind of a point of that. And I have a lot of students that are from Central and South America in my classrooms. And so I was kind of thinking through this whole process of how we sort of view them, people that are from outside, as savages almost that come in, and they're blessed to be in the United States. And they've changed their culture a lot, and their culture has changed, but their old culture wasn't necessarily bad, and I think we view it that way in a lot of times. And so I was hoping that this lesson, through this series of lessons, we would see some of the practices of the Native Americans, and hopefully that would bring out some of the practices of the Central and South American people, and kids in my classroom would be able to. Yeah. I'm not going in there. This is an example of one of the shelters that the kids have an opportunity to build while they're here. This was kind of the general idea of the whole thing. So as I was working with the ad hoc committee, we were trying to think of an idea that would sort of unify everything that was taught here at Calvin Crest. We really wanted a lesson to where the kids could be presented with some sort of phenomena. And then from that point, the kids could ask questions about it, and we could say, what do you wonder? What do you see? What do you wonder? Those kind of things, and then work through the science in that regard. And so this was one of the most popular lessons right here, and it's the shelter building, and the whole course is called Survival. And so we thought, you know what, let's frame the whole thing around survival. And so I brought you to this place so that you could kind of get the bigger picture of what my project is all about and the bigger picture of the idea. So it's survival in terms of kind of the micro scale, how can humans survive, but it takes it into a kind of a bigger stage than that. How can humans survive in living in the wild? And so we look at the Native American component, how did they survive and thrive? And then finally, how can we can survive as a people through this idea of climate change and all of the unsustainable practices that we have. And so that was the unifying thought that I had to tie all of this together. And I think it's going to work really well. Like I said, we're not quite done with it all yet, but there's some great lessons that are coming out of it, and I think it's going to ultimately provide a wonderful opportunity for the students to get to go to a really cool place like this, do some fun things like building a shelter and making fire and those kind of things, and then learning about our environment and the things that help humans survive.